Hello, this is Angie Yingst, and you're listening to Centered, grounded conversations about the metaphysical. Welcome to Centered. My name is Angie Yingst, and I am your host. You know, when I started this podcast, I really wanted to share some of the great grounded conversations I get to have about metaphysical topics like the tarot and healing and crystals and the things I do and the things I'm interested in. And I wanted you to kind of have a podcast where someone isn't promoting something all the time and where we just get to explore ideas. I always get this sense that someone's selling something or plugging something. And what I've really enjoyed is having these regular conversations with Kyra Pauls. And I'm sure you've figured this out already, but I'm a nerdy, connection-seeking research monkey who loves to explore, pontificate, explicate, laugh, and dissect the things that I love to dissect. And because tarot is such a huge part of what I do, I love having conversations with Kyra. So Kyra and I, we're not only colleagues, but we're also friends, and we have this ongoing conversation all week. We use Marco Polos, which are like little video clips, and we talk in Instagram, and sometimes we even text, and we always are talking about tarot, and we're always talking about how it shows up in our practices. And Kyra is a licensed social worker and therapist, so her the way it shows up for her is different than the way it shows up for me as a healer. And this week, we started talking about gender and gender fluidity and non-binary and masculine and feminine archetypes and the idea of gender in the tarot. And as we were talking about it, we decided to take it to the podcast because when we're having those conversations, they're also like revelations to us. Like we're still figuring it out. I have been reading tarot since I was 15 years old. And I can just tell you that a lot of people have an idea of tarot as being sort of childlike or looking at the future, fortune telling or whatever. That's not how I experience it. Tarot to me is an area of study that is deep and rich. It's both art history and archetypal images, and it's all the things, religion and mythology. And so at any rate, I didn't edit this episode much. It's pretty much as is. Kyra and I are both neurodivergent, and you get to hear us explore our special interests live on air. And we go off topic, we explore tangents, we laugh, the usual stuff. But this episode is really rich in conversations about Greek mythology, fairy tale, religion. And this has to be one of my favorite conversations I've recorded. The hour plus went by in a snap. This is a long one. But as always, I hope you enjoy it. We love hearing feedback about these conversations and what you want to hear more of or less of. And I'm prepping another Q&A episode. So if you have a question for me, I have a record button on my Anchor page. I have one on my website. Just feel free to record a question for me, put it on your phone, email it to me at Angie@themoonandstone.com. Or, you can always just write in and let me read the question out loud. So let me tell you a little bit about Kyra. She's been a frequent guest, and she's going to be, we're going to regularly have these tarot conversations as we have been. Kyra is a social worker and therapist who's training in archetypal analysis from a Jungian perspective. She's trained in it, but she's also training at the Jung Institute. She is certified as a shadow retrieval facilitator and trained as a yoga teacher and massage therapist. She's a practicing witch and druid, and you can find Kyra online at awintarot.com. Enjoy this episode. So let's just start by saying that we've been having this ongoing conversation about gender. And not necessarily about tarot, but then we started talking about the archetypes of tarot that might be helpful when we're thinking about gender. As a mom of someone who identifies as non-binary,
Mhm.
And I know you work with a lot of non-binary, gender fluid, gender queer
Yeah.
people. I think it's very interesting to think about this
Yeah.
in terms of the archetypes.
Yeah.
So,
No, absolutely. And the book report thing that I was telling you about, which I found it was on Instagram by Alec V. Menon, and they're a non-binary individual, and they wrote about like the invention of the sex binary. And they were saying about how definitions of sex changed drastically over time. We moved from a unisex model to a binary sex model in the late 18th and early 19th century, and that previously males and females were viewed as different forms of the same sex. Everything in the universe had a temperament. Things that were hot and dry, like the sun, were considered masculine, and things that were cold and moist, like the moon, were considered feminine. But it was believed that people had the same sex organs. It was just more heat in males or more cold in females. Um, and they go on to say about how gender and sex, like it held a cultural role. Um, yeah. Let's see. And then it wasn't until the 1800s with male scientists who also used pseudosciences like phrenology, which also
is that reading the skull?
yes, they
Okay.
read the skull, which that's considered a pseudoscience. And so these are the same people who started creating the distinctions between the genders and also biological differences between races too. So it was all primarily pseudoscience. Um, but that before that, like a vagina was viewed as an inverted penis. Um, and the ovaries as their own form of testicles. And so I think like when we're talking about gender, it's important to keep in mind, even when we say like feminine or masculine, we're talking about more that universal concept of like the sun and the moon and the heat and the
Right.
cool.
And you see that all over the tarot. You really
Mm-hmm.
do. Like the masculine um cards, like the Emperor, for example, which is almost traditionally like the masculine, the father card. He's in the desert,
Absolutely. Right. Yeah,
you
exactly.
know.
Yeah, whereas the Empress is in that like lush, fertile garden. And
Exactly. Like it's like,
is there a water fountain or something by her as
yeah, she
well?
has water there. Yeah,
That's
behind
right.
her.
Yeah.
Like almost
Yeah.
like a waterfall coming in.
Hmm.
So when was that? When did he say like 1860s?
It was 1803 is when it began.
1803.
Yeah, so we're
So
talking like
interesting.
really, really modern history in the grand
Yeah.
scheme of things.
Considering the majors were really designed in the 13th or 14th century, 1300s,
Right.
like that wouldn't necessarily have been a concept.
Right, absolutely. It's like this concept of, the emperor as perhaps the protector, the defender, the safe container, all those sorts of things, but
Yeah.
that doesn't have anything to do with a penis. But it does have everything to do with that idea of like the sun and heat and
Yeah.
all of that.
It's, I mean, I find the gender very interesting. Like, even if we go to the Fool, for example,
Yeah.
like we start off with this, like, I mean, I guess it's a boy, but it doesn't have to be.
Right. He's kind of just a child, a
Yeah.
young person. Yeah.
And I mean, the only thing that gives it away is the Adam's apple that
Oh,
he's like
yeah, he
showing off.
does.
But beyond that, like even like his tunic is very kind of feminine.
Absolutely. Yeah,
He is definitely a
absolutely.
dandy.
Well, yeah, and if you consider like the fool as I always associate him with Percival from the Legends of King Arthur, and Percival
Yeah.
was a young boy who was raised by his mother and shielded from the world of men. And so he was, what we could consider a bit of a dandy in the sense that like he didn't really have any awareness or connection to the more masculine world of
Yeah.
the time.
Well, he's holding a flower,
Yeah.
right? And that
Yeah.
has like its own language too. Like it
Right.
wasn't considered, flowers were not considered a feminine thing then, right?
Yeah. Well, and
So,
you've seen my dog too. Like my
yeah,
dog looks like the fool's dog, and so
yeah,
I always think of the fool's dog as being a girl.
that's so funny. I never thought about it.
I'm like, I don't know, but yeah, it's like the flower and all these other things that, yeah, while they aren't necessarily tied to something that we would call girly or something like that necessarily, they do have this other kind of essence to them that's not necessarily completely heat masculine oriented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's interesting too that there's like snow-covered hills in the background.
Oh yeah,
So that
that
cold
is.
feminine part, if you think of it that way, cold and dark.
Yeah. Yeah, because you have like the sun up there and then the cold. Yeah.
Yeah. And even like what is supposed to be on his tunic? Do you know? Like
That's a really good question.
they look like the symbols of like the pomegranate. It's not really though. I guess it more
Yeah,
looks more
it
like a
says
lily.
that the fool's tunic displays 10 circles, and the circles represent the 10 emanations, or Sephiroth of the Hebrew tree of life.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, that's all over the place in the tarot, so
Yeah, and repeated suns and stuff is what some other individuals interpret it as.
yeah. Does
Um,
it say what's on his bag, by the way?
mm,
No.
let's see. Um, yeah, it doesn't necessarily say specifically. It just says that it holds all that he will need on his journey, at least what I'm finding so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
Um,
also wanted to bring up like Pamela Coleman Smith because maybe
yeah,
that will set a good stage because Pamela Coleman Smith is the artist of the Rider Waite, and we now call it the Rider Waite Smith deck, because she was pretty much marked out of the whole process, and she was paid like pennies for what she did
right.
for this project.
Absolutely.
So Pamela Coleman Smith, who's called Pixie, is a mixed woman. She is Jamaican and um, English and American. I don't quite understand. She lived between America and England. And one thing that she did was she was a set designer. So a lot of the cards actually look like they're on stage, which is so interesting because it kind of changes the meaning if you think about like they're not actually living their life, they're on stage. So that means they're presenting this. But one of the things about living and working in the theater is that she worked with mostly men and the men played most of the parts. So they were dressed in drag, basically. I mean, I don't think they didn't call it that, but
Yeah.
they did all the acting. So a lot of the figures that are women look like men. They have masculine features. And all my students point that out to me, by the way.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm always like, oh, really? I didn't, I don't really think of it that way. And then as I'm thinking of it that way, I'm like, whoa, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. No, that definitely is. Well, and I think about, it's like moving to like the magician and the high priestess. It's like with
Yeah.
both of them, even though they also do have their more traditional associations, the magician being a masculine figure and the high priestess being a feminine one. I mean, even looking at the clothing that they wear, and even just how they look and their styling and everything, I don't think that they're quite as overtly binary masculine and feminine as the emperor and empress.
I 100% agree with that. I
Yeah,
mean, they're almost asexual in some ways. Like you
absolutely.
would think that the magician would be a symbol of male fertility, but not
Right.
at all. He doesn't come to represent that. He is,
No,
kind of is the alchemist, so he brings it all together, you know.
right. And
And there's all of the elements he's working with, so he is embodying masculine and feminine.
absolutely. And for whatever reason, for me, just in my own personal card draws, I don't know if this is something that anyone else has ever felt with the magician, but Dionysus or Bacchus comes in
Yeah.
very strongly with the magician for me. And Dionysus is the trans non-binary kind of figure within Greek mythology.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
You know what's interesting? This is so off the topic, but when I was in Italy, I was hanging out with a bunch of Italian people, and they said the word finocchio meant gay. And I don't know if it's like, and I apologize to any Italian people that listen, but it basically means fennel, right?
Oh, okay.
Okay. So uh in the processions for Dionysus and Bacchus, Dionysus slash Bacchus in Italy, they would carry huge fennel stalks.
Oh, wow.
And I'd always wondered if that was the connection with like
Yeah.
why would they call a gay person fennel? But
Oh, I love that. That's so fascinating.
I know. I just always found that really interesting because I was really interested in those bacchanalia, like um, the different kind of cults that came up around Dionysus with
Yeah.
allowing like the animal self to take over because he really did embody all of the things.
Yes. Yes.
He was
Yeah,
a
and
hedonist.
that's why I really associate him with the magician, right? Because it's like that is kind of the energy of the magician.
Mm,
Anything is possible with him. And he is in touch. Like, of course, he has human consciousness, but he also is no stranger to his beast
yeah,
within, and that is how he manifests his reality.
I love that. I've never thought of
Yeah.
that, but I really like that.
Yeah. Well, and I know with Dionysus, his story begins with his life being in danger, and
Yeah,
so the women around him dress him up as a little girl to protect him. Um, but then from there, just all of his associations with, drugs and alcohol being that he helps us humans, us mortals, traverse worlds.
yeah,
And so he's the bridge between worlds, both this one and the other world, but then also the masculine and feminine worlds as well.
yeah,
He's a figure that for a lot of my clients I work with who are trans and non-binary, we talk about Dionysus a lot. I know that many individuals, I've even read reports of people seeing Dionysus, and it's what they would assume is a woman, almost
yeah.
completely. Yeah.
That's funny. I've always pictured him that way too.
Yeah.
I should say, I've always pictured them that way. Only
Yeah.
because it's like I always see Dionysus almost like surrounded by women. You know what I mean? Like, because there were all those cults, those feminine cults that were like rip the
Yes.
animal and eat it raw, like rip an animal apart and then eat it. What is
Yes.
that called? I forget the name of that.
Yeah. I don't remember. But you're
You,
right, like, there were Dionysus is one of the only, I mean, at least that we think of as male gods, that had, like, cults of women.
yeah,
Um,
but he didn't have sex with women,
no.
right? He was strictly gay.
Yeah, he wasn't like I mean, you think of like a Dionysus figures and archetypes in our world. There's like the the Charles Mansons and stuff like
Yeah.
that at the worst of it. But Dionysus wouldn't have necessarily gone that route.
Yeah. Oh man. And then I mean the high priestess like has always been that figure that to me is like has a very masculine look per se.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it makes so much sense for her to be associated with what, again, that moon, that cold, that
Yeah.
feminine. And yet at the same time, again, that's the whole thing about this masculine and feminine thing, is that it has nothing to do with anatomical body parts and things like
No.
that. She could just as easily be any individual who's not a cis woman.
Yeah. Yeah, because her femininity doesn't come from nurturing. Like everything is cold in
Yeah.
that picture. It feels very like distant and cold. And she is very like it feels like she has it all in the head, like it's all
hmm
heady and airy rather than watery, even though her dress is water and all that stuff. But
Well, and it's funny yesterday how we were talking about, like, what aspects of ourselves do we associate with femininity? And you
yeah,
were saying about your nurturing and natural, like, kind of motherly instincts. And I was like, that's so funny that you name like all these empress qualities. Cause like
yeah,
when I was thinking about mine, I was like, what aspect of me is feminine? And I was like, it's the part of me that sits and can observe and take in
hmm,
information, and that is wicked intuitive. Like
yeah.
that's the aspect of me. So it's funny that it's the high priestess, and yet, to some extent, when it comes to like children and things like that, sometimes I almost feel too much like the high priestess. Like I'm like, hey,
Yeah. I feel like I can go back and forth though. That's the interesting
yeah.
part is like, and what makes it kind of complex when we talk about these traditional ideas of femininity, it's just like they don't fit ever.
Right.
It's
No, they
like
never do.
at work, I have to, I think I come across as more high priestessy. And then
Mhm.
at home, I come across definitely empressy, you
Right.
know. In
No,
circles, I come across
absolutely.
empressy. You know what I mean? Because I'm one on one with people. But
Yeah.
in a like work setting, it's just the okay.
Well, and what about our masculine halves? Because I mean, for me, it's interesting. I mean, my birth card is the Hierophant, and the other week I actually had a dream. It was very bizarre. Even like while I was having the dream, I was like, really? I mean, come on. Um, but I was dressed as the Hierophant, and I was like speaking or something, but I was wearing his robes and his garbs, and so it's like my masculine half does feel very connected to him.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's so interesting because him and the high priestess, the Hierophant and the high priestess are both like celibate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's almost like
Are
their
you telling me something? No.
sexuality is very hidden,
Yeah,
right? Like it's not
absolutely.
front and center. Whereas
Yeah.
the high priestess is like, or I'm sorry, the empress is in like sleeping clothes,
I know.
lounging on a chaise lounge, it's
Absolutely.
like,
And sometimes she's even depicted with like this big pregnant
yes,
belly and like
exactly.
large breasts, and yeah, she's very fertile. And the
Yeah,
emperor too is even very he's 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 charged in a lot of different ways. I think sexually
yeah.
charged can definitely be one of them.
I mean, he's holding a phallic symbol, right? Like he's
Exactly.
just got this weird scepter that
He just
doesn't
has
make sense.
he has a penis right in his hand.
Yeah, exactly. He's holding the penis and the ball. Like it's so weird. But that's
Yeah.
like how the on the chariot, not to jump around too much, but on the chariot there's that phallus and yoni symbol that are together on the front.
Yeah.
Like it has the little thing representing like I'm too sexy for my chariot.
Well, that's so interesting that the cards go from this like mask, femme, mask, mask, and then to the lovers and the chariot, which are a blend of both.
Well, it's funny if you split them like 2 and 2, like pairs, like the magician and the high priestess go together, right? The emperor
Absolutely.
and the empress go together, and the hierophant and the lovers go together
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's almost like the singular, like a non-sexual celibate pope, and the Adam and Eve symbol of like we're about to get it on.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then that's the chariot and the empress, or yeah,
Mhm.
chariot and strength together then.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the strength card too, again, I think usually it's discussed as a woman taming a lion, but that woman once again is a relatively non-binary figure.
Absolutely. It's funny because I guess we didn't really talk about it, but like when the high priestess, she's sitting between a white pillar and a black and a white pillar, the Boaz and Joachim pillars from the Temple of Solomon. But that really represents like she's sitting between the two, like the yin and the yang, right? Like she's
Mhm.
kind of like in between gender in a lot of ways, which is
Yeah.
interesting. But
Yeah.
then you see the same in the chariot when he's sitting between the masculine and feminine sphinxes
Absolutely. Yeah.
with the weird boobies.
Yeah. Well, and then we have the hermit, which is depicted as a person with a big old beard.
Yeah.
So traditionally interpreted as masculine. Though
Masculine.
it's interesting once again because there is that feature in his lamp, like associated with the masculine and the light, but
Yeah.
he's surrounded in darkness and cold. And so he really
Yeah.
also actually bridges those two worlds.
What I find fascinating about the hermit too is, at least in my classes, I often ask, like, what do you most relate to? Like, what is your card? What card do you go to for yourself? So
Mhm.
many women go to the hermit,
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's
so even if it is a masculine image, it doesn't feel overwhelmingly masculine.
no, it's not, I would say of all the cards, like, if any of them are decidedly or even overwhelmingly masculine or feminine, it's the emperor and the empress. And
Yes, we should
from the
talk about them.
yeah, from there it's like really a lot more fluid and non-binary.
Yeah, really in the second half, the only time you see that real delineation between masculine and feminine is in the devil.
Right, yeah. Yeah,
Otherwise, everything is sort of non-gendered at all.
right. Absolutely.
But let's talk about the empress and the emperor, because their femininity and masculinity, as we said, is like so different from the magician and the high priestess.
Yeah. Well, as you said, like, the emperor and the empress have a lot more to do with their how do I want to put it? They're more relational
Yeah,
than the magician and high priestess, who are more focused in on their own kind of inner worlds and that sort of a thing. And so it's interesting that that's where the polaric gender dynamics start to come in, is
yeah.
that relational sort of thing.
That's a really good way to put it,
Yeah.
being relational, because that's the difference between the high priestess and the magician. You never see, and then you can't even really quantify their relationships.
I know it's kind of hard to imagine either of them even being in a relationship. Like the magician, I just imagine like he would not, like he's just doing his own thing.
Yeah.
And the high priestess, I really cannot, it's the same thing with her. I really cannot imagine that. I mean, I imagine the high priestess, having some associations with the serpent and various things
Yes.
that could point to sexuality in some way. Again, it's very, very quiet. It's not like she's like, oh my god, guys, I just got engaged. Like
Yeah.
that wouldn't be her. Not to say that she couldn't have lovers, but she wouldn't necessarily be outwardly sharing that sort of thing.
Right. Like to me, it's funny, like you associate the magician with Dionysus. I associate the high priestess with the Oracle of Delphi.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Like she's in this temple, she's there all day with this, like, getting high from the fumes. So she's like just speaking in riddles. It's like no one's following her because there's nothing to teach, right? Like she's just like, here it is, here's what's happening.
Yeah, there's a deck that I have. Oh gosh, I can't remember what the deck is called now, but it's a newer one. And they go through like fairy tales throughout the entire world in it.
Whoa.
And it's really good. And I can't remember what they have for the high priestess. I was trying to remember if it's the Oracle of Delphi, but I know that the Nine of Swords is the Oracle of Delphi, and it has Oedipus's parents holding baby Oedipus, like learning
Oh
from
God.
the Oracle, and they're like, "Oh no!"
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so interesting. Wait, what number do they have it?
Nine of Swords.
9, of course.
And
Yeah.
they have about, like getting in caught up in your own head and then
Yeah.
possibly even making the wrong decision.
Yeah. Like all
Yeah.
the stuff you do to prevent it causes it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then when you move into the Empress and the Emperor, do you associate them with any
The
particular?
Empress I really associate with Aphrodite.
I love that. I mean, she has a symbol of her.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the Emperor with Aries or Mars.
Yeah, me too. That's what I associate Emperor with.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the two of them, even though Aphrodite had many, many lovers, I would say that Aries is kind of the guy you think of as like, I don't know, if she's polyamorous, he's like the main
Yeah.
the main one.
I know it's funny when people, like, I've had people say, "Oh, this is like Mother Earth, it's Gaia." And I was like, "Do you know what Gaia did?" I'm just curious. She like let her husband Kronos like murder every one of her children.
Right.
Basically. That's why
Yeah.
I don't associate her with Mother Earth necessarily.
No, no, I definitely think that she's much more of an Aphrodite kind of a figure.
Yeah.
And
Her
possibly even to some extent, maybe a bit of a Hera or a Demeter as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the pomegranates kind of lead to that Demeter kind of energy too.
We didn't even say about the high priestess, but definitely a lot of Persephone
Yes,
with
Persephone.
the
Yeah.
high priestess. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question about I talk about Persephone and Demeter in like literally every class I teach because I think it's so powerful. But
And it's very powerful for women who have had narcissistic or controlling mothers.
yeah, that's so interesting. How do you use it that way?
Well, Persephone was never really depicted in statues away from her mother. She was never like her own
Yes,
person.
of course.
And
Yeah.
so it's almost like she had to be abducted by Hades, if she was ever to really break free of that. Um, but yeah, no, so many individuals I work with, women I work with who have had, I don't even want to say narcissistic mothers, but overbearing mothers, really associate strongly with that story, that it's like Demeter, although it can be looked at as this story of like, wow, look, there's this mother who just loves her daughter so much. She's just going on this like endless search to find her daughter. In reality, many of them feel that Persephone is very, very imprisoned by her mother and not really allowed to actually grow up into being a woman. And the thing that makes us grow up as individuals, whether we like it or not, is our encounters with darkness and facing it ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's, I guess, the thing I've heard is people talking about Persephone as like being in love with Hades. And I often wonder, like, do you think she was in love with Hades?
Well, I think that with that story, the way I always talk about it with people is like, let's remember that this is not a real world story. This is not
Exactly. Yeah.
something that would happen in the real world. That being said, I do think that it's in a symbolic sense, it makes so much sense that this is an energy that comes into her life, and the rape is symbolic of something that is unexpected, that is drastic, that is like, whoa, I encountered a darkness. But then from there, what Hades represents for her as being the aspect of herself that when she got in touch with her darkness, it can now assist in protecting her and helping her to individuate from her mother. I definitely think the rape and the love makes sense in that context, but if we tell it as like a real world story, it's just kind of gross.
Yeah, totally.
But in a symbolic sense, it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I always find it interesting if she didn't, because then she basically has the 6 months with her mother, who, if we see her as the overbearing mother, she goes right back down to another abusive relationship or a relationship where she's trapped. So like there's no freedom for Persephone.
Absolutely. And I can say, for me, Persephone is an archetype that I had identified very strongly in myself. Like when I was much younger, I was like, I'm definitely a Persephone. And my relationship with my mother is very much that. My mother's not a narcissist or anything of that sort. But because of her own, you think about Demeter, because of my mother's own life traumas and what she saw in her own life, just like Demeter seeing her dad rape everybody, you know what I mean? It's like she's a little bit like guarded and protective of her young child.
Well, she was raped, wasn't she? Isn't that how Persephone came to be?
Right. And so it's like I can when it comes to the Persephone story, I can see how some Persephone archetypes out there end up taking the path of encountering darkness and then using that to individuate. But you and I both know that you see the repetitive Persephone archetypes where you have women who are like, I'm going to rebel against my family or whatever. And they go with, a Hades type of man. And then they switch back and forth between, am I being controlled by my family or am I being controlled by my husband? And that is when you get stuck in that really toxic Persephone cycle.
I love thinking about that story as sort of an archetype story for the narcissist and the empath,
Absolutely it is.
Especially because she's taking in this thing that represents fertility, the pomegranate. And and as a bereaved mom, like the Persephone Demeter story is really important for bereavement, right? Because the grief we all relate to, like when I'm grieving, I'm going to make the whole world suffer with me, like no one eats if I don't eat,
Absolutely.
And there's no joy there. It isn't until she encounters kindness from strangers that she allows herself to show love again,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's what I love about those myths and stories is that they follow a certain pattern, and said pattern can end up going in a direction that can be healthy, or it can end up going in a direction that it becomes dysfunctional. It all depends on, the
Yeah.
severity and the degrees. But you see both, and you
Mhm.
see it with the Demeters, you see it with the Persephones, and you see it with the Hades of the world, how that ends up happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's so interesting that you related to Persephone and I related to Demeter in
That
that.
is so funny.
We keep doing the Empress
Uh,
High Priestess thing.
we do. That's wild. Yeah. And yeah, I think it's when it comes to femininity in our world, like you see that story again and again and again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think in the behind the High Priestess on that tapestry, those are pomegranate?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do too. And
Yeah.
on her dress, do you see them as pomegranate?
Yes.
The Empress dress? Yeah, me too.
Yes. Absolutely.
They just look so different. The one on I almost called her Persephone on High Priestess's tapestry is like brightly colored, like it
Hmm.
looks come come here,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
Whereas hers just is like almost closed. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's a full pomegranate rather than it cut open,
Yeah, definitely.
looking like a vulva or something.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
I always have to talk about vaginas, vulvas, or
I
uteruses.
know. Yeah. So
Uh,
yeah, I mean, it's funny that we said initially with the Empress, we're like, oh, totally, Aphrodite or Venus, but then digging a little more, there is a lot of association with Demeter.
that's the complexity of the Empress, is that on the outside, like she presents as Aphrodite, like she draws you in with the beauty. But there's
Right.
so much more complexity when you get
Yeah.
under the surface, which is like, I'm only like this 6 months out of the year. The other 6 months, I'm like making you all pay
Yeah.
for
Well,
my
and
grief and
I
loss.
think too that it's like, when the Empress and the Emperor as like Aphrodite and Ares, that's like them at their best. At their worst, the Empress is Gaia and the Emperor is Kronos.
Yes, yes. I love that. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, totally. Yeah. Speaking of the emperor, like his imagery it definitely has that like medieval feel to him too.
Yeah.
So how do you relate him to like the King Arthur? Do you see him as King Arthur
Oh,
or
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, definitely. It's kind of interesting because the way that the emperor is depicted, I do see as almost being a little bit more muscly and hyper masculine than a
Hmm.
King Arthur type of figure.
Yeah.
Whereas King Arthur, I don't know. There's an intellectualism, I guess, that doesn't feel quite as brutal.
Yeah.
But I think symbolically, absolutely, they are very much that same type of figure. And
Yeah.
then the Hierophant being a Merlin sort,
Yeah.
in that sort of a context, and the High Priestess being a Morgan Le Fay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course then the Empress being a Guinevere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, they go so. I just love that they can be seen on like you even see the symbols of all of these different myths. It's
Yes.
not like she inadvertently did that. It's like she really
Right.
did think about all these different symbolic archetypes,
Well, and that's what's so fascinating too. I remember reading before that like Pamela Coleman Smith was an artist, and yeah, she was involved with the Golden Dawn, but she wasn't as seasoned or as much of an occultist as like Arthur Waite. But he only gave her even just like kind of minimal guidance on the
Yeah.
majors. And then from there she did the whole thing, and somehow she figured this out. And I think it's because she was a high priestess. She just
Oh,
knew.
yes. Yeah, I mean, I love that. I always teach that to my students, and it kind of blows their mind. I'm like, could you imagine like figuring out how am I going to draw? Like none of the pips were ever drawn.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, I know we're
Ever.
talking about the majors today, but that blows me away too, that she's telling this story in each of the suits that was not given to her at all. Like he was gatekeeping all that info because he was
Right.
literally like levels above her in the
Right.
Golden Dawn, which
Yeah.
is she's just so incredible.
Yeah, she is. No,
I told you
absolutely.
Sharon has been like obsessed. So she's the one who told me like, oh yeah, all these people are in drag. I was like, what? Like even the women were like dressed like men and the men were dressed like women. And so
Yeah.
that's a really interesting aspect if you're kind of thinking about it. Like the Hierophant in particular, I did this one class where only 2 people signed up and I still held it. And it was one of the best classes I did because it was 2 younger people. I think they were both like one was like 30, one was like 28 or something like that. And the guy was gay and he had been reading Queering the Tarot, that
Mm-hmm.
book. So he's the one who brought it, like he basically brought it to class. So every time we talked about a card, he was bringing in like aspects of like how to approach this if you're queer, which I loved. I mean, it
Absolutely.
taught me so much, and that's when I ended up buying the book. But he was so insistent that the Hierophant looked like a woman. Like he could
Yeah.
not get over that it was supposed to be a man.
Oh, that's so cool.
Like
Yeah.
he just like was like, no, that's a woman. Which is
Yeah.
interesting if you compare the face of the Hierophant and you compare the face of the High Priestess.
Oh, yeah,
They're
absolutely.
very similar.
Well, and I do think of, the Hierophant and the High Priestess as being like very similar figures, the main difference being that, the High Priestess is someone you find in a little temple along a path that you're going down as you're following the moonlight, and there's a strange temple and she's just in there. Whereas the Hierophant has much of the same teachings and wisdom as the high priestess, but he's like, hey, come on everybody, I got something to
Yeah.
tell you.
Yeah. And my teacher taught me and his teacher taught him and blah blah blah. Like
Right,
it gets passed down the
exactly.
line.
Exactly.
That's so interesting. It
Yeah.
is interesting though if you do think of the Hierophant as being in drag, like
Yeah,
pretending to be a man.
that's so that's so funny with that dream I had. That's
Yeah. But see, I think that is because you channel so much,
right. No,
and it comes
absolutely.
through and you're being called to teach more and, you know, have
That's so
two bald
interesting.
acolytes.
Yeah, I know. They need to specifically like have that ring of hair
Yeah.
around their head.
Oh my gosh. But there is this Saint Marina. She was a girl and her father, like her mother died, her father didn't know what to do with her, so gave her to the priests, right?
Hmm.
Basically like the monk, I don't know, like an abbey or whatever.
Hmm.
And she dressed in drag and became a priest, and no one knew she was a woman. Okay.
Hmm.
So basically just turned into a priest, always was pretending to be a man. And then someone in town, one girl, got pregnant and accuses Marina of being the father, which we know cannot happen, right?
Right.
So gets kicked out of the, it's not a convent. What do they call it for men? I don't know, the monkhood, the abbey,
Oh, the
whatever. Yeah,
monastery
the
or
monastery. He gets kicked
yeah.
out and like basically is like, all right, I guess I'll just marry her and raise this baby with her. And spent
Wow.
her whole life, pretending to be a man and pretending to get this person pregnant and having a baby and raising the baby as his own,
Wow.
and died a saint because never revealed that he wasn't the father.
Yeah.
Because
Had
she can't get
no
pregnant.
ability to inseminate anybody.
Exactly. But just always was of service to this woman and her child.
Wow, that's incredible.
But like, it's funny because they made Marina a saint for doing that. Even though
Mm,
the priests kicked him out, the monks kicked her out.
yeah.
I don't even know what pronoun to use, because I think in many ways that is, he is a man, he
Right.
lived as a man and could have revealed many, many times that he was a woman and didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So obviously he saw himself as a man, but it's interesting that the sainthood was dependent on Marina not revealing the biological sex.
Absolutely.
Or at birth, born female at birth.
Yeah. That's so
Or
fascinating.
assigned female at birth. So
yeah. Wow.
I know that's a funny, like, I don't know if that's too much of an aside, but
no, it's not at all. It fits right in.
Yeah, I was when he would argue with me that this is a woman, I just could not stop thinking of that story of Saint Marina.
No, I love that. I love that.
It's what pisses me off about the church not, being so anti-trans. It's like, you don't understand the history of the church.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I think that's the thing about so much of the judgment and bigotry that comes out of the church is a lack of understanding of not just human history, but their own history.
Yeah, exactly.
like, and it's wild because I mean, everybody, like, so many of the saints are people that at the time the church had tremendous judgment towards and even many times executed. So it's like, wow, you guys got a long history of this one, don't you? Are you just trying to make more saints by being bigots? Is that what this is?
Yeah. I mean, monasteries and convents were places where queer people went.
Absolutely.
It was almost like a whole cast of queer people.
Exactly.
So they were, it wasn't that they were, I mean, it sucks. I don't want to say that there's, that was great for them. But
right, exactly.
I think in the same token, that wasn't demonized. That was discussed,
Right.
There was sex being had in those places. So.
Yeah, and there's a long history of that, because you figure it's like, you have a job that you want people to sign up for, and one of the requirements of the job is, well, you can't have sex, and what's going to be the evidence that you've had sex? Well, it's if you or somebody else gets pregnant. Well, okay, so you're saying I don't have to get anybody pregnant. Cool.
Which is funny, in my tree, we have 2 popes in my family tree.
Wow, really? Which ones?
I don't know. My cousins did our whole genealogy from Italy. So that means that he was not celibate. My cousin's like, yeah, we have 2 popes. I was like, holy crap.
Yeah, go figure.
Yeah. I have that info. I should give it to you.
Yeah, I'm so curious.
Yeah. So I think like the lovers ends up becoming like a really binary card.
Yeah. With the angel being a bit
That's what I was gonna say.
non-binary.
What do you think of the angel? Well,
Yeah,
all the angels are non-binary, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I was just thinking about this the other week, because I had done this long intensive Kundalini yoga training back in 2011, and for various reasons, one of them being that Yogi Bhajan was a really he has his shadow, no doubt.
Yeah.
And the community, I felt, was not really accountable or vocal or really acknowledging that. It's different now. People are acknowledging it more. And anyway, I've been getting back into it a little bit, and when I did Kundalini yoga, it's really involved in Sikhism, and so you have the Sikh gurus like Guru Ram Das, Guru Nanak, and I remember when we were discussing the Sikh gurus in my training, my teacher Siri Neal said about how many individuals felt that some of these Sikh gurus were actually feminine souls. But because of the times that they were born in, that they kind of, for whatever reason, reality manifested them as people who would be viewed as men. And so I thought that that was really interesting because these are very like holy figures. Like these are
Right.
almost like they're human, but they're almost non-human. And so when I think about gurus, ascended masters, saints, people of that sort, I do think that there is this non-binary, like you were saying earlier about the world card and the anima mundi, the soul of
Yeah.
the world. I don't think that these are gendered figures.
No, I completely agree. I mean, they almost can't be gendered.
Right, right.
Like that's the part that always is confusing when people say like God made us in his image, and then they act like only priests can be, like only men can be priests. And it's like, but he made me in his image, in her image too.
Right,
Like that's
absolutely.
not just for men. So God is both.
Well, yeah, and
In
honestly
Yeah,
made the female form first
right. Had to.
in
It's
the
chicken
image.
egg. Yeah.
So, yeah.
But
Um
it was interesting when I have my degree in religion, and I focused on early Christianity. And so I had this women's studies, well, it was a women in religion class. And this Hebrew scholar came in, and he said, the first part of Genesis is really saying like, first there was her, chaos, and she
mm,
ruled the world, ruled the
mhm,
universe, whatever. And then God came in and like tried to order chaos. That was
wow.
like this idea. So there's so many of those like weird translation things that you know, especially in the Christian tradition, became like really solidified. Whereas in the Hebrew tradition, in the Jewish tradition, there is this whole midrash, the arguments of what each word means. Like translation wasn't just a given and pass to the next person. There are
Right.
long, long tomes of the arguments between the rabbis about what this word means and how it's used.
Yeah.
So there is a sense in the Jewish tradition of the Abrahamic religions, there is this sense of like, we are allowed to argue about this and discuss it, and like it's not written in stone. Whereas when you start getting into this literal scripturalism that comes up, like probably in more of the 16th century or 17th century, you get this idea that like, oh no, it's definitely God made the world in 7 days. Like
Yeah.
that was never the tradition. It was
No.
always discussed and argued. And it's interesting to think there's a goddess and a god in the Christian, Old Testament, or in the beginning of Genesis. So
Right. No, absolutely. And that does make so much sense with the connections to the Gaia Chronos
hmm,
story. Absolutely. And just Emperor and Empress. I always think of the Empress as chaos and the
yeah,
Emperor as order. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that. What about
Yeah.
justice? Like, not to jump ahead, but I
Well,
realize we've been talking for a while, but
I know. And we have those two cards that we were just talking about earlier that are
yeah,
like, it's like they're depicted, I think, as being very intentionally androgynous or
yes,
non-binary, justice and temperance,
temperance, yeah.
which
It-
it makes sense. It's like justice is balancing the poles and temperance is blending the poles.
yes. Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah.
Bending the poles and balancing. Yeah, I mean, they both have like when I just remember thinking, like, is Justice Athena?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and Athena is, a character too herself that um in some ways could be described as being very masculine. I mean,
Yeah,
she's not even born from a woman. She's born from her own father's head.
yeah,
And so there is that she definitely has features that are of that sun energy.
yeah. It's just the difference between her and Aries in terms of their connection with war, right?
Right.
Like she's about restoring justice, and
Mhm.
he's about a different kind of energy,
Yeah.
different kind of warring energy,
Yeah.
you
Whereas it's
know?
interesting, I was just talking with my partner last night about some of this, and I was talking about yeah, Artemis, who I have her figure on my mantle there. She's been one of my go-to goddesses for a
Yeah,
long time. And the thing about Artemis is that although, she's like Athena, she's a virgin goddess, and very often even talked about or portrayed as having even what we would consider kind of like a butch sort of an energy.
yeah,
And she's definitely a lesbian, no doubt.
yeah,
She is one of the few that distinctly does not like masculine
yeah.
energy, which is interesting because although I think in our world today she would be viewed as masculine, she is actually the peak of the feminine.
That's what I
She
was
is the
gonna
goddess
say.
of the moon. Just because she hunts and does those things, those are not what make one masculine. What makes one masculine is that association with logos and the head and the
Yeah.
sun and all of that, which is much more Athena, even if Athena is portrayed as being more fitting more into the woman box as we think of it than Artemis is.
It's interesting that you say that though, because Artemis also, like, a lot of the myths that involve Artemis are like men who are doing distinctly masculine things. Like, oh, there is a beautiful goddess. Like she's always portrayed as very, very beautiful,
Right.
right? And she's
Yes.
like doing feminine things like, I'm going to frolic with the nymphs in a pond naked, and some
Exactly.
guy's watching her and she's like, oh shit, like I gotta go hunt that guy,
I
like,
know she's gonna go hunt him down.
but it's like always like she's always punishing the masculine.
She is. No, for
Yeah,
real. And I know, when I worked at the domestic violence agency, I kept Artemis in my office because, she's the protector of women and children.
yeah,
And she decidedly, and that's the thing, like I have veered away from that slightly because genuinely, like, I do have a real appreciation for men and masculinity. And I think I was only able to really come to that place in appreciating my own masculinity
yeah,
and understanding the value in it and understanding that, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, even though the emperor has his issues. We need the emperor
yes,
um, within us. And so anyway, I would keep Artemis in there because basically that was primarily what we were dealing with.
yeah,
And so she decidedly does not like or men or masculinity.
yeah.
Um, but
Which
yes,
is interesting because Athena does. She almost
yes,
doesn't like women.
yes. Oh my gosh, she punishes women so harshly because she's
Harshly.
the daddy's girl.
She's the one woman that you hang out with, like, I don't really get along with other women.
Yeah, she's like, I don't really like other women very much. They're kind of like,
Catty, and they're always trying to compete with me.
yeah, exactly. She's a total pick me.
Yes, exactly. Which is funny though. I mean, you really see like this blending non-binary thing. Like
Yeah,
she could have made Injustice the pillars be black and white as well, but she
right,
didn't.
right,
They're just
exactly.
gray. Everything
Yes,
is gray around them. That meaning the combination of that masculine and feminine.
yes,
So
absolutely.
So with temperance though, I don't know even what to make of it in terms of gender, because there's really nothing there.
Yeah, no, and I mean, again, it's like it's an angelic kind of being, once again. And so there really is not a gender there. You think even about, like I was thinking just a little bit ago about some of the archangels and stuff like that. And I think about Archangel Gabriel, Archangel Ariel,
Yeah.
being ones that, it's interesting that, of course, your name is not what determines whether you're a man or a woman, but in our culture, we do associate certain things. It's interesting that many of these angels, like Ariel, have names that are both a modern day man's name and a modern day woman's name.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I used to, do meditations with this angel channel, Rita Strauss, and I can remember like being in one of those, and you would experience it too, like if you're gifted at all, because you just raise that vibration up. She calls in the angel. I would always see Gabriel as a man, and a lot of the people in there would see Gabriel as a woman.
Right. No,
Like
absolutely.
everybody experienced it differently. And that makes sense to me, because I'm like, they're not like the gods of old that are going to turn themselves into a cow to rape somebody. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Well, I remember this was actually a Doreen Virtue thing, believe it or
yeah,
not. But I remember one time reading something Doreen Virtue had shared about some of the archangels, and she was just, there was someone who was writing to her about, they were someone who had experienced a lot of sexual trauma and violence from men in their life. And so these images of these very masculine angels was difficult for them. And Doreen Virtue said herself that, well, they all are women too. And so if it helps to bring in the figure or the image as their feminine form to feel
yeah,
safer, then do that.
that's awesome.
Yeah. So I was like, oh man, it's like she had a lot of issues then. She has way more issues now, but occasionally there was one or two things that
Yeah,
she
I
was
mean,
on
I
point about.
honestly used to like her stuff, and I just don't think that it's
Her
wasted.
cards worked well.
I
I will
loved her
say
goddess
that.
cards.
I have them sitting right next to me. I actually just used them.
I love them, but last time I used them, I was feeling like they were dead energy to me. And I
I
think I
almost,
need to cut my cord connection with like an old idea. You know what I mean? So,
yeah, no, absolutely. I kind of wonder about that too, because I've noticed some of her decks like lose their magic a little bit. I swear they used to work very, very
I
well.
know.
But I wonder if it's because of what happened with her and it's connected to her now.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the biggest crystal people did the same thing, like found Jesus and
Oh,
renounced
really?
crystals. Yeah.
Oh my
Naisha
God.
Asyan.
How can you even like renounce crystals? You know what I mean? Like they
She,
literally exist.
well, that's the part that's like, I was basically saying this in one of my lives. This is like, there's no religion associated with it.
No,
Like, it's
it's
not going against any
minerals from
religion.
the earth. I
Exactly.
don't understand.
But I feel the same way about tarot. It's like, even
Yeah.
if you completely see tarot as something from your subconscious, like, that's not going to compete with your religion in any way, shape, or form.
Right. No, I actually I've had a number of atheists that I've worked with, and in my therapy sessions I always use tarot.
Yeah.
And so some of them have initially been like skeptical about it because I don't believe in
Yeah.
anything mystic. I'm like, this just mirrors your unconscious. That's it.
Yeah.
And they can get with it. And so it's like if a non-believer can get with it, then I don't think
Yeah.
it's gonna hurt your Christianity.
Exactly. It's so weird. Well, let's talk about the Animus Mundi, and then we can
Yeah.
wrap up. It's interesting just to go into like when you go through like temperance, we're kind of seeing that non-binary thing. The devil has
Mm,
the next image of like masculine and feminine, and it's
right,
chained to him.
right.
like
Yeah.
full display, like you're
Yeah.
still naked,
Yeah.
which is interesting.
Well, and it's interesting that the death card, on one hand it makes sense, on the other hand it doesn't. I know throughout the world, various cultures, mythos, belief systems, that death is associated with that cold, dark, feminine energy.
Yeah.
That being said, Hades is a man, a masculine figure.
Yeah.
And then the death card being number 13 is associated with number 4, the emperor. So
Yeah.
they both wear that suit of armor. So death looks more, you would assume, like a masculine figure, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's still skull and bones. You don't really know.
Really know. Yeah.
um,
Definitely in a traditionally masculine role, at least for this time. Like he's a knight, right?
yes, absolutely. Um, but yeah, the devil is definitely well, the devil himself, I guess, again, in that case, is portrayed as being a
Yeah.
masculine figure. But I
Beard
think
and
the devil
bunch.
energy in general is one of those that is very capable of shape shifting and
Oh
morphing.
yeah.
Can even just be like, hey, look, I'm money. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Absolutely.
um, and then after the devil, we've got the tower and
Tower.
then the star. We were
And that
saying,
the water bearer, she looks feminine. I'm resistant to call her she,
yeah,
though, because I think that the water bearer is another androgynous figure.
absolutely. Well, and when you think about the sign of Aquarius, I think it makes the most sense for it to be an
Yeah,
androgynous figure.
absolutely. The moon, there's no figures really,
Yeah.
except that you have the moon and the sun together.
Yeah, you do. You have
And that
them.
always is that kind of non-binary idea and feeling.
Absolutely. And then the sun card gives us the baby.
That we can't see the gender of,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
any baby.
yeah.
And then the judgment card has all the naked dead people rising.
With the androgynous angel.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Gabriel.
yeah.
But the animus mundi.
Yes. Yeah, the
Do you want to talk
soul of the
about that?
world.
Yeah.
Yeah, the anima mundi being the soul of the world, or even like the way in which we are all cosmically or connected, every living being in the world. If you think about even, comparing it to like the mycelial network of mushrooms and stuff, and that um, you have a mushroom that pops up in China, and it sends a message over to a mushroom that's in Pennsylvania, and it pops up, and that one sends a message to one in Mexico, and they pop up, and they're all
It's amazing.
communicating with each other underneath the surface. But like, yeah, the idea that our souls that we all have are connected to this larger soul of the world, and we all interact with one another. And I was just talking with someone about this yesterday. It's almost like off topic a little bit, but someone who works for a victim's agency, we'll say, went to a hearing. It was a parole hearing, which is where someone who has perpetrated a crime is asking the parole board to be released from prison. And so what this means is that this person I know was there because of a victim who had been hurt by this person who now wants parole. But the person who wants parole shared their story, shared all this work that they've done. And this person I was talking to ended up they were just in a complete sobbing mess. They felt so much for this man, and yet they were concerned that they might receive backlash at work because they were crying for the perpetrator.
Yeah.
in the situation. And we were just discussing this whole idea that it's like when you have genuine compassion, and it's real compassion, if you have compassion for victims, then you have compassion for all victims.
Exactly.
You know, and this whole idea that if someone does something awful, you think about the way that the mushrooms connect and interact with each other. That's not a them problem, that's an us problem.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
that's where the anima mundi really comes in, is that any disease or disorder in the world, even talking about, everyone's been talking about freaking Jeffrey Dahmer, which I think is disgusting that we're all talking about it so much in the way that we are. That being said, someone like that is showing us something that is very sick with all of us, and not with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's the energy of that anima mundi, I feel, and like that we all are connected, and in the best of ways and the worst of ways in which it comes out.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like, one of the things that when I was doing my shamanic training, that we spent like an entire day of workshop on talking about the myth of separation and how it causes spiritual illness. Because when we feel like we're different than everybody else, it causes imbalances within our system, which is why like we constantly have to remind ourselves that, that collective unconscious belongs to every single one of us.
Absolutely.
Right? And the connection that we have with the earth, we're not living on the earth. We are the earth. We are part of the earth.
Yeah.
And so it's everybody's responsibility to heed the call that's put out when the earth is like, I'm suffering,
Absolutely. And the fool starts out as, me on my own journey, which again, there's nothing wrong with having an ego. In fact, it's very needed in our world to have some type of an ego to move us through the world. And then it ends with the fool realizing, the illusion of separateness, and coming back into wholeness and integration within himself and the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was such a cool conversation.
Yeah, this was. I like this one.
I love it too. I mean, I literally could talk all day about this stuff.
I know. Yeah.
I sadly do. Like, just like
I know,
break into like side conversations about mythology constantly.
Well,
it's one of my areas of study and focus. So
I think that's what people are listening to us for.
Yeah.
They know we're not going to stay on track with it. I know,
it's like our neurodivergent travels through whatever topic we thought about yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. That we were just talking about through Marco Polo.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, as always.
Yeah,
I love it.
Thanks, Angie. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Centered with me, Angie Yingst. If you'd like to send me a question or comment about this show or any shows, you can send them to Angie@themoonandstone.com.